Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today we're heading into the rugged mountains of Oklahoma, where an abandoned truck, a loyal dog, and thousands of dollars in cash mark the beginning of one of America's most baffling family disappearance cases.
Yeah, and it really is a scene that just, it fundamentally shatters our expectations of how people behave when they disappear.
Right, totally.
Because usually, when human beings vanish, the objects they leave behind or take with them act as a sort of compass. It points toward their final intentions. But here, that compass is just violently spinning.
Yeah, spinning out of control.
Exactly. I mean, when you encounter a locked vehicle containing $32,000 in cash, winter coats, cell phones, and most unsettlingly, a beloved, starving family pet left inside, well, it doesn't suggest a calculated departure. It points to a sudden catastrophic interruption of their reality.
I look at that list of items, and my brain just sort of short circuits. Because think about it. If you are listening right now and you decide to, run away to start a new life, the very first thing you take is your money.
Obviously. You'd grab the cash.
Right. And alternatively, if you are planning something tragic if you intend to harm yourself and your family, you do not take the time to lock your dog in the car, to slowly starve to death over a week. It just made absolutely zero logical sense.
It really doesn't. The physical evidence left on that mountain actively resists any singular logical explanation. It forces us into a corner.
And that is exactly what we are going to walk through today. We are going to explore the timeline, the incredibly bizarre clues left behind, and all those chilling theories surrounding the Jamison family's final trip into the wilderness.
There's a lot to unpack.
There he is. So we invite you to examine the facts alongside us. Because the further you walk into this forest, the more the ground just shifts right beneath your feet.
Yeah, and to understand why a family would leave their most vital survival tools and their dog locked in a truck, we can't just start at the vehicle.
No, we have to go back.
Exactly. The context of their lives prior to that moment is the only way to decode the scene. We really have to look at the psychological environment they were inhabiting before they ever packed their bags.
I completely agree. So let's move away from that desolate dirt road in Latimer County for a moment. Let's look at the town of Eufaula, Oklahoma, where the Jamisons lived.
Eufaula, right?
Yeah. So at 44 years old, Bobby Jamison was a man who was basically physically trapped in a failing body. He had been in a devastating car accident back in 2003, which left him with this chronic, debilitating back pain.
And we aren't just talking about a mild ache here.
No, not at all. We're talking about the kind of structural damage that fundamentally alters your nervous system. It changes your personality. He was relying really heavily on prescription painkillers just to get through the day.
Right, and the medical mechanics of that are vital to understand. Chronic severe pain doesn't just hurt. It acts as this constant stressor that can literally reshape the brain's gray matter over time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it reduces cognitive flexibility and drastically increases anxiety. So you combine that with long-term opioid use, which can induce severe mood swings and dependency, and Bobby's baseline reality was incredibly fragile.
That makes so much sense. And then beside him was his 40-year-old wife, Sherilynn, who was navigating her own profound mental health crisis. She lived with bipolar disorder and severe depression.
A depression that had reached a terrifying critical mass just weeks before they vanished.
Yeah. In September 2009, Sherilynn had actually been hospitalized following a suicide attempt. And right around this same time, she lost custody of her 12-year-old son from a previous marriage.
Which is just a devastating blow.
Completely. He went to live with his father because court statements describe Sherilynn as acting erratically and being deeply, unreachably depressed. So you have a household where the structural supports have completely rotted away.
Both parents are profoundly vulnerable.
Exactly. They're isolated.
They were without an anchor. Bobby is physically compromised, and Sherilynn is navigating extreme psychological distress. And in the middle of this is their 6-year-old daughter, Madyson.
Right.
This extreme isolation and compounding trauma, it creates the perfect, fertile ground for severe paranoia to take root. When the internal world feels entirely out of control, the human mind often begins to project that chaos onto the external world.
Imagine standing in your own living room.
Right.
And you are completely convinced that the creaking floorboards aren't the house settling, but an active, malicious force hunting you.
It's terrifying.
It is. That became their daily reality. They began to believe their house in Eufaula was haunted, not just drafty, but spiritually infested.
And this centered heavily around Madyson, too.
It did. Madyson had an imaginary friend named Emily. Now, a 6-year-old having an imaginary friend is pretty standard childhood development.
Very common, yeah.
But Sherilynn became utterly convinced that Emily was a dark entity. She thought it was the ghost of a child who had died in that house.
And the documentation of their unraveling during this period is genuinely alarming. They actually sought out their local pastor, Gary Brandon, desperate for spiritual intervention.
Yeah, they weren't just asking for general prayers either.
No, they were demanding an exorcism. Bobby even asked the pastor if he knew where to procure, and I quote, special bullets.
Wait, special bullets?
Yes, to shoot the spirits he claimed were swarming the roof of their home.
Wow. It's like watching a psychological thriller where the characters are barricading the doors against an invisible enemy. They actually went out and purchased a satanic Bible.
Operating under the desperate logic that they could use it to understand and banish the evil presence.
Right. Investigators later found what was described as a witch's Bible inside their home. And Sherilynn had gone so far as to spray paint this bizarre warning on a metal storage container in their yard. She wrote that her black cats had been poisoned and witches don't like their black cat killed.
It is highly tempting for observers to look at the spray paint, the request for demon-killing bullets, and the occult books, and just write the Jamisons off as bizarre eccentrics.
Oh, for sure.
But if you look closer, it reveals a phenomenon known in psychiatry as folie à deux, or shared psychosis.
Shared psychosis.
Yes. This occurs when a delusional belief system is transmitted from one individual, often the one with a more dominant underlying psychiatric condition, to another closely associated person.
So basically, because they were totally cut off from the outside world, Sherilynn's delusions essentially became contagious, and Bobby was in so much pain and so isolated that he just sort of accepted her reality.
Precisely. They weren't socializing. They had pulled Madyson out of school. Their reality was an echo chamber constructed entirely of fear and persecution. They were desperate to escape the spiritual war zone they believed they were living in.
Which brings us to the escape plan. So on October 8, 2009, they decide to flee. They are heading to the Saint Bois Mountains near Red Oak, Oklahoma. And if you don't know the area, Saint Bois is French for without wood, but ironically, it is a dense, heavily forested, incredibly rugged mountain range.
Extremely remote terrain.
Very. They were going there to inspect a 40-acre plot of remote land. The goal was to buy it, haul that spray-painted storage container up the mountain, live completely off-grid, and homeschool Madyson.
And this is where we encounter one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the entire investigation.
The video footage.
The visual record of their final hours at home. Because of their severe paranoia, the Jamisons had installed a closed-circuit security camera system outside their house. And that system captured them packing their white Ford F-150 pickup truck for this trip.
I really want to slow down here because if you ever moved or packed a car for a big family trip, you know what it looks like. It's chaotic, right?
Oh, yeah. Usually very loud.
People are talking, passing bags, maybe arguing over space. But this footage, it is horrifying in its silence. For 20 to 30 unbroken minutes, Bobby and Sherilynn are captured walking back and forth between the house and the truck.
And they are moving like automatons.
Yeah.
They are in this slow, mechanical, trance-like state. The pacing is entirely devoid of normal human interaction. They do not speak. They do not make eye contact.
That's so unnatural.
And structurally, the packing is entirely disorganized. On multiple trips, they walk from the house to the truck carrying absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. They arrive at the vehicle, stop, turn around, and walk back inside. It mimics a severe neurological deficit or a profound state of dissociation.
It's haunting. Just haunting. But amidst that bizarre, empty pacing, there is one highly specific detail. Sherilynn is seen carrying a brown briefcase out of the house and placing it into the truck.
A very crucial detail.
Yes. I want you to mentally highlight that brown briefcase because it is going to become the ghost at the center of this entire mystery.
They eventually finish packing and they drive away. And for 8 days, absolutely nothing happens. Nobody reports them missing. No family members call the police.
Which really tells you everything about their isolation.
It does. That extended silence speaks to the tragic depth of their situation. It wasn't until October 17th that the alarm was finally raised, and not by anyone who actually knew them.
Right. It's a group of hunters riding dirt bikes out in Latimer County. They're navigating these deep, muddy back roads miles from anywhere, and they come across the white Ford F-150.
Just parked on a dirt trail?
Exactly. The doors are locked, and when they peer through the glass, they see the family's dog, Maisie. The poor animal has been trapped inside that cab for over a week.
Heartbreaking.
She is severely malnourished, dehydrated, and barely clinging to life.
Initially, the local sheriff's department approached the scene, assuming it was a routine stolen and abandoned vehicle recovery.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the moment they broke the glass to rescue the dog and began documenting the interior, the sheer gravity of the situation materialized.
Let's talk about the inventory, because it completely shatters any normal narrative of a family going for a hike.
Yeah.
Inside the locked truck, police find Bobby and Sherilynn's wallets, their driver's licenses, their cell phones,
The GPS device.
heavy winter coats. And stuffed underneath the driver's seat is a bank deposit bag holding $32,000 in $100 bills, just sitting there in the dark.
For a family whose primary documented income was disability benefits, possessing that volume of liquid cash is highly anomalous.
Definitely.
It immediately forces investigators to pivot. Are they looking at the proceeds of a drug transaction? Is this an incredibly reckless method of carrying funds for the potential real estate purchase they were discussing?
But wait, the truck yields one more secret? Tucked among the belongings is an 11-page handwritten letter from Sherilynn to Bobby, and it is radioactive.
It's a pure hate letter.
It is. She calls him a hermit and a monster. She accuses him of being a toxic presence who doesn't care about their daughter. She states unequivocally that she wants a divorce and references him backing her into corners and bringing out the absolute worst in her.
From an investigative standpoint, finding a vitriolic 11-page document of marital hatred inside an abandoned vehicle instantly elevates the possibility of a murder-suicide.
Right, because the motive is basically written down for them.
Exactly. You have documented clinical depression, an assertion of severe domestic discord, and an environment isolated enough to conceal a tragedy.
But I struggle with that angle immediately. I want to push back on the police's initial assumption there.
Go ahead.
If your marriage is imploding to the point of lethal violence, or if you are fleeing an abuser, why in the world do you leave your money? And more importantly, why do you leave the keys in the ignition, step out of the car, and physically press the lock button on the door to trap your dog inside?
That is the core behavioral contradiction of the case. Locking the vehicle while leaving the keys in the ignition is the hallmark of a momentary departure.
A quick stop.
It is an action that says, I am stepping away for 5 minutes and I will be right back. You secure your valuables, you leave the dog safe inside the cab, and you intend to return. You do not subject an animal you love to a week of agonizing starvation if you know you are walking into the woods to end your life.
Exactly. So, realizing the family is missing in this vast, unforgiving terrain, the sheriff's department launches a massive emergency search. We are talking 400 volunteers on foot.
A huge undertaking.
People on horses, mules, ATVs. They bring in 16 different teams of specialized cadaver and tracking dogs. They even deploy an unmanned drone, which, in 2009 was a highly advanced, rare piece of technology for local law enforcement.
But the environment fought back against every technological advantage they had. The Bois Mountains feature deep ravines, jagged, rocky outcroppings, and incredibly dense underbrush beneath a thick canopy of oak and pine.
It's basically a jungle.
It is. From the air, a drone camera often just sees an unbroken sea of green leaves. It cannot penetrate the canopy to see the forest floor.
And the weather was just as hostile. Heavy rainstorms had absolutely battered the region right after the family disappeared.
And that rain physically dismantles a search operation.
How so?
Well, when a person walks through the woods, they shed microscopic skin cells. Bacteria feed on those cells, producing a specific off-gassing scent that tracking dogs follow.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was bacteria.
Yes. A heavy rainstorm literally washes those skin cells deep into the mud or carries them away in runoff streams, entirely erasing the biological breadcrumbs. The dogs were functionally blind.
That's incredible, and they searched relentlessly despite that. The dogs actually alerted near a local water tower, so the police drained the entire tower. Nothing. They dragged ponds. Nothing. The Jamisons had seemingly evaporated.
Gone without a trace.
And this is where the story enters this agonizing 4-year purgatory. The active search winds down. The family members are left waiting by the phone. Tips trickle in. Someone thought they saw Madyson at a diner in Texas. Someone thought they saw Bobby at a gas station. But it's all just ghosts. The trail isn't just cold. It's frozen solid.
The agony of that 4-year void cannot be overstated. When a case remains unsolved for that long, the investigation rots from the inside out. The public loses interest, the physical evidence degrades, and the landscape reclaims whatever secrets it holds.
That is until November 16th, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
We are 4 years later and 2.7 miles away from where that white Ford truck was found abandoned. A group of deer hunters are navigating an incredibly remote, difficult patch of the woods known as Smokestack Hollow.
A very fitting name.
Yeah. One of the hunters looks down and spots something pale on the forest floor. He thinks it's an old, bleached turtle shell.
But upon closer inspection, the grim reality of the wilderness reveals itself. It was a human skull.
They search the immediate area and find a second skull. And then, devastatingly, they find a much smaller skull with 2 front teeth missing. It was Madyson. The wilderness had finally given the Jamisons back.
The remains were heavily scavenged. 4 years of animal predation and exposure had scattered the bones. But the initial positioning and concentration of the remains indicated a heartbreaking final posture. The 2 adults and the child had been lying face down, side by side in the dirt.
Now, you would naturally think that finding the bodies is the finish line. It provides a crime scene, it gives the family closure. But in reality, finding them just ripped open a dozen new unanswerable questions.
And this introduces a critical concept in death investigations, the forensic void.
The forensic void.
Yes. When human remains are exposed to the harsh extremes of Oklahoma, weather-baking summers, freezing winters, and heavy rain for 4 years, soft tissue is entirely eradicated. The medical examiner was presented with dry bones.
Explain to us exactly what that means for solving a crime. Why are bones not enough?
Soft tissue is the canvas on which the story of a death is written. Without it, you cannot test for defensive wounds, stab marks, or strangulation.
Yeah.
Because the internal organs are gone, toxicology is impossible.
Wow.
We cannot test if they were poisoned, heavily medicated, or under the influence of illicit drugs. Any DNA from a potential attacker, a scratch, a drop of sweat, skin under the fingernails, is completely erased by the elements.
So the medical examiner has absolutely nothing to work with. They officially listed the cause of death as undetermined. There was a small hole found in Bobby's skull, and the hunters who discovered the bodies swore up and down it looked exactly like a small caliber bullet hole.
Which is an interesting detail.
But the medical examiner ultimately ruled that the fracturing was consistent with animal activity and weathering.
Nature is an active participant in destroying evidence. We finally knew where the Jamisons ended up, but the forensic void meant science could not tell us how they got there, who forced them to that location, or what mechanisms ended their lives.
It's so frustrating.
It is. And historically, when forensic science falls silent, human nature and speculation rush in to fill the vacuum.
And rush in they did. I mean, the facts of this case are so sparse, and the clues left behind are so wildly contradictory that it became a massive, sprawling canvas for amateur sleuths, Reddit investigators, and true crime documentarians. Everyone is trying to force these puzzle pieces together.
It's a natural human impulse to try and make sense of the senseless.
Exactly. So let's critically examine the most prominent theories, starting with the one law enforcement was forced to evaluate first, murder-suicide.
The architecture of the murder-suicide theory is built entirely on the psychological instability of the parents. You have Sherilynn's recent psychiatric hospitalization, the profound stress of losing custody of her son, and that blistering 11-page letter articulating deep marital hatred.
Right, the paper trail is there.
Furthermore, it was a known fact that Sherilynn owned a .22 caliber pistol, which she habitually kept inside the truck for protection.
But the pistol was not in the truck when it was found. It has never been located. So the theory suggests that either Sherilynn or Bobby reaches a breaking point, forces the family out of the vehicle at gunpoint, marches them into the woods, executes them, and then takes their own life.
That's the theory, yes.
But the moment you apply the actual physical logistics of the mountain to this theory, it collapses.
Completely. Consider the sheer physical geography. The bodies were recovered almost 3 miles from the truck, deep in Smokestack Hollow. Bobby Jamison suffered from chronic, debilitating back pain.
Right, we mentioned earlier how bad it was.
On his worst days, simply walking to the end of his own driveway was an agonizing ordeal. The idea that he could or would hike 3 miles through dense, uneven, rocky mountain brush is physically implausible.
Not to mention you're trying to wrangle a 6-year-old child on a grueling 3-mile hike to her death. And logically, if one parent has decided to end everything, why walk 3 miles? Why not commit the act right there by the truck? And we keep coming back to the inventory. Why deliberately hide $32,000 under a seat and lock a dog inside if you know you're ending your life? If you're suicidal, protecting your cash from burglars is no longer a priority.
Furthermore, if a firearm was utilized in a murder-suicide, where is the weapon?
It's vanished.
While animal scavengers will certainly scatter bones, they do not carry away steel pistols. Investigators conducted extensive metal detector sweeps of the area immediately surrounding the remains. If a suicide occurred there, the gun would have dropped to the forest floor and remained.
That makes sense.
Its absence strongly implies that a surviving third party removed the weapon from the scene.
Okay, if the physical evidence rejects murder-suicide, we have to look for an external threat. And that brings us to the drug theory. At the time of their disappearance, Latimer County and the Bois Mountains had a notorious reputation for clandestine methamphetamine production.
A very real problem in that region.
Yeah. The extreme isolation made it a haven for cartel-aligned or independent meth labs.
Proponents of the drug theory point heavily to the home surveillance footage. The extreme visible weight loss both adults had suffered, combined with that repetitive, silent, trance-like pacing while packing the vehicle, closely mirrors the erratic physical behaviors and severe neurochemical toll of chronic methamphetamine abuse.
Because meth floods the brain with dopamine and keeps you awake for days, right?
Yeah.
It induces sleep deprivation, which then triggers profound paranoia and hallucinations.
Exactly. Methamphetamine psychosis can create a terrifying alternate reality where the user feels constantly surveilled and persecuted.
Which would explain the cameras.
Yes. This perfectly contextualizes their claims of spiritual warfare, demons on the roof, and the need for a closed-circuit camera system. It provides a chemical mechanism for their delusions.
And interestingly, Bobby had actually reported a local meth lab to the police not long before they vanished.
A risky move.
Very. So the theory goes, did they accidentally stumble onto a massive cartel-run drug operation while looking at the property? Or, more darkly, did they bring that $32,000 up the mountain to buy bulk narcotics?
It's a compelling narrative, but it hits a massive illogical wall at the crime scene.
The money. If you are a ruthless drug manufacturer who just executed an entire family because they discovered your lab or because a massive drug deal went south, you do not leave $32,000 sitting under a car seat.
Precisely. A criminal enterprise motivated by illicit profit does not abandon a small fortune in untraceable $100 bills. Even if the murders occurred in a state of absolute panic, tossing the victim's vehicle for valuables or evidence is standard criminal protocol.
They would have taken it.
The untouched money is a massive counter-indicator for a financially motivated drug execution. Additionally, a search of the Jamisons' home and vehicle yielded 0 drug paraphernalia, and their extended families adamantly deny they were involved in street drugs.
Right. So if it's not a random violent drug cartel, what about targeted foul play by someone who actively wanted them dead? This introduces some truly dark personal conflicts. Bobby was embroiled in a vicious, ongoing lawsuit with his own father, Bob Dean Jamison.
The animosity between father and son was profound and legally documented. Bobby had sought a protective order against his father, alleging in court filings that Bob Dean had ties to the Mexican mafia, was involved in local gang activity and meth rings, and had even intentionally struck Bobby with a vehicle in November 2008.
That's terrifying.
Bobby stated under oath that his family was severely scared for their lives.
That sounds exactly like a motive for a hit. A furious, supposedly connected father ordering an assassination.
It certainly provides motive, but it lacks opportunity. Investigators looked closely at Bob Dean Jamison. In October 2009, his health was rapidly failing. He was either hospitalized or confined to a rest home at the exact time of the disappearance, and he passed away just 2 months later.
So he couldn't have been on the mountain.
Right. Law enforcement thoroughly verified his alibi. While the theoretical possibility of a contract killing exists, there was absolutely no financial or communicative trail connecting the bedridden father to a hitman on that mountain.
Then there was the Kenneth Bellows angle. Bellows was a former boarder who rented a room from the Jamisons. Sherilynn, who had Native American heritage, was very proud of it, discovered that Bellows had active white supremacist ties.
Which led to a severe confrontation.
Yes, this escalated into a massive explosive confrontation at the house, which ended with Sherilynn retrieving her .22 caliber pistol and firing it into the dirt at Bellows' feet to run him off the property.
Again, we have a compelling suspect with a documented violent grievance. However, police aggressively investigated Bellows, and he provided a rock-solid, verified alibi for the dates the family was in Latimer County. He was officially cleared as a suspect.
But the internet didn't stop at the people they knew. They looked at the people they met on the mountain. On their way to inspect the land, the Jamisons stopped and had a 45-minute conversation with a local man named Dan Clemens.
A brief interaction.
Yeah, he just gave them some friendly advice about the realities of living off-grid. Law enforcement interviewed Clemens and moved on. But years later, amateur sleuths on Reddit uncovered a wild coincidence. A man with the exact same name and age had a prior manslaughter conviction in California from the late 1990s.
This highlights the unique danger of internet sleuthing. Finding a violent criminal record for an individual with the same name in the vicinity feels like a revelation.
It feels like a smoking gun.
However, a past conviction does not equate to present guilt, nor does it provide a mechanism for the crime. Law enforcement interviewed the individuals the family encountered on the mountain and reported negative results regarding their involvement.
Which means they found nothing.
Exactly. Without a single fiber of physical evidence linking anyone to the crime scene, a past record remains a circumstantial anomaly, a statistical ghost, rather than actionable proof.
Okay, I want to pivot sharply here. What if we are completely overcomplicating this? Let's strip away the hitmen and the drug cartels. What if this is the simplest, most tragic story of all exposure?
Becoming lost in the elements.
Yes. They went up the mountain, they parked the truck, they wandered off into the deep woods to look at the property line, they became disoriented, and they succumbed to the harsh elements.
In wilderness disappearances, exposure is often the Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. The terrain of the Bois is notoriously unforgiving.
Very easy to get turned around.
Even experienced outdoorsmen can become profoundly disoriented just a few hundred yards off a trail when the canopy blocks the sun and the landmarks look identical.
And there is a specific piece of evidence that anchors this theory, but it's fiercely debated. On Bobby's cell phone, which was found locked inside the truck, police recovered a photograph of 6-year-old Madyson.
The final photo.
The digital timestamp is 2:51 p.m. on October 8th, the day they vanished. It is universally believed to be the last photograph ever taken of her.
The composition of the photograph is striking. Madyson is standing in front of a jagged rocky outcropping, her arms tightly crossed over her chest.
And the internet simply cannot agree on what her face is communicating. Some people look at that photo and they see absolute terror. They argue, look at her eyes, someone else is holding that camera, someone who has a gun pointed at her parents, just out of frame.
A dark interpretation.
But others look at the exact same pixels and say she's a 6-year-old who has been dragged on a boring hike. She looks cold, her arms are crossed to stay warm, and she's just annoyed that her dad is making her pose.
Interpreting complex emotion from a single grainy digital photograph is highly subjective. I call it a psychological Rorschach test for the viewer.
That's a great way to put it.
If you approach the case believing they were hunted and murdered, your brain highlights the tension in her posture and sees fear. If you believe they simply got lost, you see a fatigued, chilly child.
Right.
Objectively, the photograph proves only two things: that they were alive and exploring the rocky terrain at 2:51 p.m., and crucially, that they subsequently returned to the truck because the phone that took the picture was found locked inside the cab.
And that is exactly where I dismantle the exposure theory. If they got lost and died of exposure in the woods, how did the cell phone get back into the locked truck?
A critical flaw in the theory.
If you are going on a hike in the mountains in October, a hike long enough to get lost, you take your heavy winter coats, you take your cell phone. And you absolutely take your dog for a walk.
You wouldn't leave them.
You don't lock your dog in the car and leave your jackets behind to go for a casual stroll that turns deadly. The inventory of the truck completely vetoes the exposure theory.
You are absolutely correct. The items left behind are entirely inconsistent with a planned hike, which leads us into the final and perhaps most infamous category of theories, the ones that have propelled the Jamison family into the realm of modern urban legend.
The paranormal and spiritual explanations.
Yes.
Oh man, if you search this case online, this is all you find. The internet is obsessed with the occult angle. The haunted house, the pastor confirming they were fighting spiritual warfare, the satanic Bible, the witch's Bible found in the house, the spray-painted message about dead black cats.
It's a very loud narrative online.
Sherilynn's own mother even gave interviews, stating she believed the family was targeted and placed on a satanic cult's hit list because this Bois area supposedly has a dark occult history.
It is crucial here that we remain clinical and objective. As investigators of fact, we are not evaluating the literal physical existence of demons, witches, or ghosts.
Of course not.
What we must evaluate is the psychological reality of the Jamison family. We discussed folie à deux earlier, the shared psychosis.
Right, where Sherilynn's delusions bleed into Bobby's vulnerable mind.
Exactly. The paranormal elements left behind, the books, the bullets, the spray paint, are not clues pointing toward a supernatural killer. They are profound, tragic symptoms of a shared mental health collapse.
That's incredibly sad.
Whether the demons they saw were real entities or the result of neurochemical imbalances, the family's belief in those forces heavily dictated their reality. It governed their paranoia, it dictated why they packed their truck in a silent trance, and it ultimately drove them into the wilderness to escape. The haunting was real to them, and that is what matters.
So what does this all mean? We have explored the mechanics of meth labs, the logic of hitmen, the tragedy of exposure, and the terror of shared psychosis. I want to pull us out of the internet rabbit holes and back to the hard, unbending dirt of the crime scene.
The physical facts.
When you weigh all these conflicting theories against the forensic evidence, what is the most logical conclusion?
When you strip away the noise, the ghost stories, the 11-page hate letter, the rumors of the Mexican mafia, and you focus exclusively on the physical geography, the skeletal positioning, and the state of the vehicle, foul play fits the evidence best.
Specifically an ambush.
Specifically a sudden, violent encounter on the mountain.
I still struggle with the foul play angle. If I am ambushing a family in the wilderness, I am taking the keys so they can't drive away, and I'm certainly taking the cash. Convince me otherwise. Walk me through the mechanics of this encounter.
Look at the exact state of the truck. The keys were not in a pocket. They were left in the ignition. The doors were locked. The dog, the cash, the phones, the GPS were all left behind.
So they were in a rush.
This is the precise profile of an aborted departure. The family had finished looking at the land. They had returned to the truck. They had placed the phone inside. They were likely sitting in the seats, preparing to start the engine and drive away, when they were abruptly intercepted.
Intercepted by someone who forced them out of the vehicle so fast they didn't even have time to turn the key or grab their coats.
Exactly. The fact that the remains were found 2.7 miles away, positioned side by side and face down, suggests they were marched or transported to that remote location under extreme duress and executed.
It's chilling.
The side-by-side, face-down positioning is a hallmark of a homicide, an execution-style arrangement. It is completely inconsistent with a scenario where a family gets lost and slowly freezes to death.
Right, because in exposure cases, they act differently.
In exposure cases, victims often separate, burrow into the brush, or exhibit paradoxical undressing. They do not die neatly lined up face down.
But the cash. We keep hitting this wall. If they were robbed and murdered by someone on the mountain, why leave 32 grand in the truck?
Think of the cash as a narrative trap.
A narrative trap.
Yes. We, as outside observers reading the police report, look at $32,000 and logically assume it must be the focal point of the crime. But remember the physical placement. The bank bag was stuffed deeply underneath the driver's seat.
Oh. So, what if the killers simply didn't know it was there? They didn't search the car. They were in a chaotic hurry. They forced the family out at gunpoint, slammed the doors, which automatically locked, and marched them into the woods.
Precisely.
But wait, if they didn't know about the cash, What were they after? Why target them?
This is where we must return to the 30-minute security footage from their driveway and that specific detail you highlighted.
The missing brown briefcase.
Sherilynn was clearly recorded placing a brown briefcase into the cab of the truck. When police searched the locked vehicle, the briefcase was gone. Furthermore, Sherilynn's .22 caliber pistol was gone.
So the killers approach the truck. They see the briefcase sitting on the seat. They force the family out, grab the briefcase, and grab the gun. They assume the briefcase holds all the valuables, and they completely miss the bank bag hidden under the seat.
That is highly plausible.
The real prize was in that missing briefcase all along. But what was in it? More money. Drugs. Something deeply personal.
We will likely never know. And that highlights the profound, tragic limitations of forensic evidence in wilderness environments. The harsh Oklahoma landscape effectively swallowed the truth.
It really did.
Time and the elements erased the soft tissue, erased the toxicology, and erased any DNA the killer might have left behind.
It is terrifying how thoroughly nature can scrub away a crime scene. It leaves law enforcement completely paralyzed. Sheriff Bois, who led the initial search efforts, famously said that the problem with the Jamison case wasn't a lack of leads. The problem was that they had too many leads, and they all pointed in completely contradictory directions.
It serves as a vital lesson in complex wilderness investigations. When analyzing an unsolved case, you must ruthlessly separate the noise from the signal.
And there's a lot of noise here.
The noise here includes the paranormal beliefs, the hate letter, and the unverified rumors of gang hits. The signal is the locked truck, the keys in the ignition, the missing briefcase, and the execution-style grouping of the remains.
Okay, I see.
If you focus strictly on the signal, a sudden, violent interception by an unknown third party becomes the most highly probable narrative.
But without a confession, without recovering that missing .22 caliber pistol or finding that vanished brown briefcase, the case remains an official blank slate. The medical examiner's report will forever read undetermined. The police have no active suspects. It is a mystery preserved perfectly in amber, frustratingly out of reach.
It is a sobering reminder that sometimes, despite massive search operations, hundreds of volunteers, and modern technology, human beings can simply vanish, and the answers can remain permanently obscured.
It really is. Think about how this whole story started. An ordinary family outing, a husband, a wife, a little girl, and their dog. They were looking for a fresh start, a 40-acre piece of land to call their own, far away from the pressures, the chronic pain, and the mental anguish of their daily lives.
A search for peace.
And in an instant, that simple dream silently transformed into an enduring nightmare, swallowed whole by the landscape.
Consider the silence of the mountains. We spend so much of our time looking for human monsters, dissecting every internet rumor of hitmen and cartels, or looking for supernatural forces hiding in the shadows. But the vast, indifferent wilderness itself is the final, impenetrable character in this story.
It really is.
It is an environment capable of hiding a family for 4 agonizing years just 3 miles from their car, and it is entirely capable of keeping their secrets forever.
Next time, we return to the Phantom Killer. Not to recount the attacks themselves, but to examine the striking pattern that left investigators wondering whether each crime had been carefully planned from the very beginning